Okay, since I'm working on the 1600 bug for a friend, just a daily driver motor, I thought I'd go over some cylinder heads since there's not that much information out there. It seems to have been lost. Anyways, we're going to start from the 1200 all the way up to the performance heads. First off, let's start. This head here is a VW1200, or sometimes referred to as a 40 horse, depending on what year. I don't actually know what year this head is. It's a motor that was found in a snowdrift that actually appears to be good, so I will be going through it. Yes, it's missing a minor fin. We'll see what we can do about that. But anyways, first off, let's go with valve size, the biggest difference besides single port. 30 on the intake. 30 on the exhaust, 32 on the intake. Same as this 1300 it appears to be. I do not have a 1500, 1600 single port head. I am told they are the same as a dual port, which we'll go over in a second. There's the difference between first of all, that's why it's called single port, since it only has one single intake port. And the biggest difference is a 1300 is very similar to a 1600 head, and the intake port design. It's hard to tell, but the port is slightly larger. You can see the design difference here of how it bolts. About the same size bolt. Difference being a 1200 does not have a flexible or it has a solid flange. 1300s and 1600s have a flange that moves back and forth and kind of gives it some movement, where this is very solid. And if you have a bit intake manifold on a 1200 40 horse, it may be hard to get it to seal. But anywho, there's the main differences there. Unless you're restoring a car, for the most part, single port heads are pretty much not to be messed with. Some people say they make torque, but then you're still going to have to switch to a, because who's building a 1300, 1200, except for me. I will be going through those heads and fixing those heads for my own 1300 car here. Anyways, moving on, I would say this is a refreshed or refinished head. Some people might sell it as a rebuilt. It's a refreshed head because I did the work. Valve guides, everything, valve seats were in good shape, so all I did was lap the valves. I know people are going to talk about, or maybe they will or will not, because in the old days, before porting and polishing was super popular, you had a 3-angle valve job, which meant you cut the angles at 3 different angles to try and make it flow around the valve seat better. These are not. These are single cut valves, so they just basically butt flat up against it. After looking at these heads, I've decided that I wanted to do a port and polish on the stock head, probably for my 73 Super Beetle, because I see a lot of issues with them that they could really be cleaned up. And of course, now they're going up to, I see some people are doing up to a 4-angle valve job. This is stock head, stock 1600, stock 12, stock 1300. It's never been cut. Getting really close, you'll see that it has a lip here. When you fly cut a head to resurface it, that gets machined off and gives it a new surface, but also can raise the compression, as you can see by the port volume here. I don't know what the stock CCs are head are. This engine's going back bone stock. It's only going to have about 7.5 to 7.7 to 1 compression ratio, just because it's a daily driver, pump gas. Now, as I already said, dual port, which you should already figure that out, is swing around here. 2 intake ports opposed to the last that had single ones. Nothing special about these valves, springs, and everything are bone stock. The only thing, and I don't, yeah, if you look here, see how that's been repaired. These heads are part of a junk company I won't mention in the 80s and 90s that used to make dirt cheap rebuilt. Sometimes one of these heads, and I don't remember which one, was actually recast or looked like it was cast in a backyard. Hear that? Or maybe that's the difference between German and Brazilian heads. I don't even remember anymore. But anyways, valve size got bigger to 32 exhaust, 35 intake. That might be the same on the 1500, 1600 single ports. I could not find the information to confirm that, and I don't remember. But if you buy new remanufactured 1500, 1600 cylinder heads, they have 35, 32 valves, which makes me think that probably was what they were when they were stock. They got away the way of the Dodo. You don't even have to, when you build a class 1500, 1600, whatever, like the old days race car, you don't have to run single port heads like the old days. Now you can run up to an 1835, so that's the way pretty much killed off the need for single port heads. Because why not just use dual ports? Dual ports also supposedly cool better. I don't know. Been told that single ports build more torque. When I build this 1300, I'm only going for gas mileage, so not sure how the single ports will affect that, but we'll see. I can always swap it out later. Now on to some performance heads. Over here, we have what is known as the 041 head. I do know the history of the 041 head. This one was actually a new casting by Mofco. They're still in business. You can still get these. These heads are somewhat controversial, and people say they're stupid, they're junk, there was a dumb idea. Bigger ports, slightly, I've been told, don't know. But the oddity of these is 32 exhaust, 39 intake valve. These heads were originally designed in Brazil for the Puma, sort of a kit car, sort of a factory-made car. And their engineer said that to make the 1600 more efficient, it needed a 39 millimeter intake valve. That's the urban legend around these heads. Most people say they're garbage. I remember when you could buy these somewhat new for easily $100 and have like a brand new head. So we were tossing these on everything at one point just because they were easy to come by and it was better than the just mentioned junk head that somebody was selling. Stock port area for the most part. So the compression ratio, not fly cutted on this head, so this would be a lower compression head. Now the next head is going to be even wilder. This head is actually cut. You see how the holes here are real close to where the head studs go through, as opposed to here where you got a gap. This has been cut for a 1992 bore. That doesn't do much except for allowing you a bigger, compression, bigger displacement engine. Depending if it's stroked or not, anywhere from 1776, 1835 up to 2110s and 2180s. Now, the next head is even more radical. This is a CB Performance 044 head. A lot of changes on these heads compared to this one. This head uses a shorter spark plug thread. I think these are called I forget how long these spark plugs, which are of course screwed in, have quite a much longer. They just call them longer spark plugs. But anyways, so for use with longer spark plugs, supposedly for less cracking of the head. These ports are not too radical compared to right here. Either these are too radical. Let's see, stock 1600. 041, there's a slight elongation here, and over here they're actually a little bit bigger and also elongated. When you get too crazy on any of these heads, because there's not much room to go, you start getting these D-port heads where this is kind of ground that way. You just run out of areas where you can grind without grinding through the head and weakening the head. Now, this has the biggest of a production head, valve size anyways. As you can see, I've written it on here. 42 intake, 37.5 exhaust. You also notice that these holes are worse than the ones over there. This has been cut for 94mm cylinders. So the other thing about this head, because as the cylinder volume goes up, as opposed to the head volume, the volume having a piston and cylinder, as it goes up, of course, your compression ratio is going to go up. So it's hard to say what the compression ratio on this head would be. It could be anywhere from 8 to 9.5, depending on. It also depends on how you deck your engine, how much clearance from the top of the piston to the top of the cylinder itself and the head. So what was done on this head, I'll get over there in a moment. So the compression ratio will get crazy because now you're going to a 94mm head. This is what's known, and it's hard to see, as a semi-cut Hemi head. You can kind of see it where the spark plug distance is to where this is. It's much shorter, and since it's hard to tell, this has been ground, or actually there's a special fly cutter that has kind of a dome shape to it, and just cuts this round, and this is completely flat, 90 degrees of this. This is about, could be close to 45 degrees from this angle here. I'm sorry, the opposite, let's see, whatever, you know what I'm saying. Or maybe you don't, it doesn't matter. But that's what's done on these heads to drop the compression ratio to something more less than all-out race car. It will show on the clean head that I refinished. The reason I'm doing all of this in the first place was, so the Friends in car came in. I've put points in it. At one time I've switched it over to electronic ignition. I've rebuilt the car multiple times. So this last time, he said, it's not running. Must be ignition. Carburetor needs to be done again. Just he didn't know. That was not the case. When I took the engine apart, got it down to a long block, he just wanted a real seal because it was also leaking oil like crazy. You could, with the spark plugs in it, with the engine assembled, with the rockers off. I ended up doing this because I noticed something was odd about it. With the rockers off and the valves supposedly closed, you could turn the flywheel like nothing and just hear air escaping everywhere. So that told me, for the most part, I'm going to tear it apart and look at it and see what's wrong, but that the engine was done. And the engine had everything wrong with it. I will go over pistons and cylinders on a later video when I'm doing that, because it had some super cheap pistons and cylinders they used to sell in the 80s and 90s, and I'll show you why those are junk. But since we're going over heads, I'll tell you what's wrong with those heads. First, what started the major issue was never changed oil. I suspect the oil cooler was blocked, not just leaking, but it blew the seals out of it, and that's where the massive oil leak was, that he just thought was push rod tubes and just kept putting oil in it. So it was obvious this thing was getting really hot just by all the damage I saw. And the cylinder heads themselves, and these are typical where they will crack, is they will crack across the valve here. They'll crack across the valve to the spark plug on both sides. Sometimes, most common is right across here. But his engine is so bad, and I can't even get the cylinders. The cylinders are stuck to the head, so I cannot take it apart to really show you. But his have 6 cracks on every single head, both there, there, and there, and there. That's why, besides the massive damage done to the piston rings, that it had massive blow-by. That's why when I turned the flywheel, the engine spun like nothing, and you could hear air escaping in everywhere. So that's pretty much it for heads. Like I said, I'll show you the do's and don'ts of pistons, or more to the fact is going to be what you might come across, because oddly enough, I found him another motor that wasn't damaged yet, but lo and behold, it had the same junk pistons and cylinders in it. So it gives me an idea of when that engine was built, and actually I probably even know where. But like I said, this is cylinder heads. I wish I could have told you more about the 041s when I ran those, but I was just a dumb teenager, young guy having fun in his bug and just running the hell out of them. So I don't know how those perform. Neither do I know how these perform, because these, when they first came out, and they're still rather pricey, but they have generic versions of it you can find on eBay. And I don't think the CB ones are that performance ones are that expensive anymore. It's just, you know, how much money you want to spend. The only good heads I had were made by a place called Small Car Specialist, and they were between these two. They had 40 by 35 millimeter valves, which is very common, and they had the D ports and everything done to it. Those heads were awesome. I could tell you back in the day that engine ran like crazy. In a few cases where my Weber carburetors were just dumping fuel because I have a stock float, that they would even suck all that fuel down. So that was an awesome motor. I miss it. But anyways, the basics of your single port, dual port heads, and some places to look. When you're looking up cylinder heads at your swap meet, definitely check really close there. Sometimes it's hard to see, but if you find them laying around in a junkyard, 99% of them are going to have the cracks, and that's why they're there. In fact, I had a last stack of about 9 to 10 heads, and I found like 2 good heads out of them. So most of them are cracked. This is Arizona. I don't know where you're at, but in Arizona, it's really hard to keep air-cooled bugs going. But anywho, that's it. Since I'm working on Volkswagen bugs at this point, I thought I would go over cylinder heads. Thank you, and see ya.